The bus stopped at the familiar stop, and I reluctantly got up from my seat. Plymouth greeted me with drizzling rain, typical May weather for this town. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder and looked toward the hill where my parents' house stood. It was a 15-minute walk, and each step was getting harder. My name is Bethany Wells, and I was returning home for my brother Abbott's 30th birthday. Not that I had a choice. My mom had called every day for a week, her tone gradually changing from pleading to outright accusatory. "You always think about yourself, Bethany. Think about your family for once." Classic manipulation, but it still worked. The rain intensified, and I quickened my pace. Plymouth had always felt too small, too familiar, even though I had moved to London 5 years ago. Everything here reminded me of a childhood I would rather forget. My parents' house loomed ahead of me in all its Victorian glory, 3 stories high, with a well-kept garden and a driveway where 2 cars were already parked. One belonged to my father, Lucas, the other most likely to Abbott. My brother always liked to arrive early to get an extra dose of parental admiration. I stopped at the gate, took a deep breath, and allowed myself a moment of weakness. It wasn't too late to turn back, come up with some urgent work, an illness, anything. But I knew that would only delay the inevitable. Besides, this time I had a plan. The door opened before I could ring the bell. Mom stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always. Miriam Wells, 57 years old, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Finally," she said, looking me up and down. "You could have come earlier, Bethany. I asked you to be here at 3 and it's almost 4 now." "The bus was late," I lied, walking past her into the hall. In fact, I had deliberately chosen a later bus to shorten my stay here. "You know your father could have sent a car for you," Mom said, closing the door behind me. "But no, you always insist on doing things your way." I said nothing. There was no point in arguing. The house smelled of fresh baking and polish. My mother always tidied up thoroughly before guests arrived, even though our housekeeper, Martha, kept the house in immaculate condition. "Is Abbott here yet?" I asked, taking off my wet jacket. "Of course," my mother replied with a pride she never showed me. "He arrived this morning to help your father with the new security system, and Felicity is with him. She's such a lovely girl." Felicity Price, my brother's fiancée. Cold, calculating, and absolutely perfect in my parents' eyes. She worked at a PR agency and helped shape the image of Abbott's technology company. I've met her twice, and both times she looked at me with poorly concealed condescension. "Come on, everyone's in the living room," my mother said, nudging me forward. "And try to be friendly, Bethany. It's an important day for your brother." The living room greeted me with an explosion of laughter. Abbott, tall and confident, stood by the fireplace telling a story. Next to him was Felicity, impeccable in her ivory cashmere dress. My father sat in his favorite chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, smiling at his son the way he never smiled at me. "Here's our Bethany," Abbott exclaimed when he noticed me, finally deigning to join us mere mortals. It was meant to be a joke, but I could hear the familiar contempt in his words. "Happy birthday, Abbott," I said, forcing a smile. 30 is a serious age. "Well, some of us manage to achieve something by that age," he replied with a smirk, and my father grunted approvingly. I swallowed my comment. Instead, I walked over to my father, leaned down, and kissed him on the cheek. Lucas Wells, 59 years old, with silver temples and perpetually tight lips, barely acknowledged me. "You've lost weight," he remarked. "Too thin. Don't they feed you at your publishing house?" "I'm a proofreader, Dad, not a food taster," I replied, trying to joke. "Bethany thinks that correcting other people's mistakes is a real career," my mother interjected, turning to Felicity, although we always hoped she would continue the family business like Abbott. "Not everyone has business acumen," Felicity said condescendingly, giving me a sympathetic smile. I sank down onto the sofa, feeling a familiar weariness. It was always the same. My achievements were insignificant, my decisions were wrong, my life was disappointing. I looked at them and thought about the box hidden in my bag. My memory helpfully brought back the day 3 months ago when it all started. I had come to my mother's birthday party and we had argued as usual. She had reproached me for not wanting to settle down, find a decent man, and give them grandchildren, as Abbott would soon do. I just don't understand you, Bethany, she said then, cutting salad in the kitchen with irritation. You're 25 years old, living in a tiny apartment, working for peanuts, and you seem perfectly content with it. I love my job, Mom, I replied, trying to stay calm. And my apartment, too. Love doesn't pay the bills, she snapped. Look at your brother. At his age, he already had his own company. He had already met Felicity. We're different people, I said, and we have different goals. Bad blood, she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. You should have known better than to have me. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. But you chose Dad, I said, trying to hide my hurt behind sarcasm. So you only have yourself to blame. She turned to me, her face contorted with anger. What does your father have to do with it? She shouted, then suddenly stopped, as if she had said something forbidden. We both froze. She was the first to recover, laughing nervously and changing the subject. But I remembered, and that phrase haunted me. What does your father have to do with it? Not our father or just father, but your. And the way she stopped herself, as if she had said something she shouldn't have. Bethany, are you with us? Abbott's voice brought me back to the present. I was talking about a new investment. We're going to open an office in Singapore next quarter. Sorry, I was lost in thought, I replied. That's great, Abbott. Congratulations. Your brother is expanding the business in Asia, my father said proudly. I've always said that the future lies in Eastern markets. Lucas is helping with contacts, my mother added. His construction company has worked with several Singaporean firms. Family business, family connections, family pride. I've always been excluded from that equation. After that conversation with my mom, I started noticing things I had ignored before, like how my father is always a little distant with me, but comes alive with Abbott, how my mother sometimes looks at me with a strange expression, as if she's looking for someone else in my features. And I started asking questions. The first was Aunt Ingrid, my mother's sister, the only person in the family who always treated me with warmth. I visited her at the library where she worked. Aunt Ingrid, I asked casually, do you remember what Abbott and I were like when we were children? Were we similar to Dad? She looked at me for a long time. Why do you ask, Bethany? I just thought about it. Everyone says that Abbott is a carbon copy of Dad, but no one has ever said that about me. Ingrid put down the book she was holding. Family resemblance is a complicated thing, she said cautiously. Sometimes it shows up in unexpected places. Why don't you take a look at some old photo albums? Her tone and the way she avoided a direct answer only heightened my suspicions, and I started digging. First, the old albums hidden in the attic of my parents' house. Then the medical records I found in my father's office when I was visiting them. Blood types, records of illnesses. Abbott and Dad both suffered from the same rare form of arthritis, but I had a different medical history and a different blood type. But that wasn't enough. I needed proof, irrefutable proof, so I decided to get a DNA test. Getting DNA samples was easier than I thought. Abbott's hair from a comb when he stayed at my London apartment. My dad's from an old toothbrush he left behind after visiting last year. And my own sample. Waiting for the results was agonizing. Every day I checked the mail, waiting for the envelope. And when it finally arrived, I couldn't bring myself to open it all day. When I did, everything fell into place. Earth to Bethany! Abbott snapped his fingers in front of my face. You've been in La La Land all evening. What's wrong? Just tired from the trip, I replied. Sorry. Maybe you should go rest before dinner? My mother suggested. But there was no concern in her voice, only irritation. The guests will start arriving at 7, and I want everyone to look appropriate. I'm fine, I said, but I think I'll unpack my things. As I climbed the stairs to my old room, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would finally tell the truth. The room looked exactly as I had left it 5 years ago. My mother hadn't touched a thing, as if it were a museum of my failed childhood. I put my bag on the bed and took out a small box. I opened it to check the contents one last time. The DNA test results, printed out and bound, with key passages highlighted. Proof that neither I nor Abbott were the biological children of Lucas Wells. I closed the box and hid it back in my bag. Tomorrow, after the birthday cake, my moment would come. I would no longer play the role of the family disappointment. I would show them that I knew the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something like peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same again. Abbott's birthday morning began with a flurry of activity. It wasn't even 8 o'clock yet, and downstairs there were already voices, doors slamming, and dishes clattering. Mom always turned family holidays into theatrical productions where everyone had to play their assigned roles. I lay in bed, listening to the sounds and mentally preparing for the day ahead. The box with my test results was in my bag. Several times I was tempted to check its contents, but each time I stopped myself. I knew what was in there. I knew it would change everything. When I went down to the kitchen, I found my mother directing 2 catering assistants. They were arranging plates of canapes and filling glasses for the welcome champagne. "Finally," my mother said when she noticed me. "I thought you were going to sleep all day. Breakfast is on the table, but don't touch anything on the counter. Everything is already laid out." "Good morning, Mom," I said, pouring myself some coffee. "How can I help?" Miriam gave me a critical look. "Better not. I've got everything organized. Just be ready for 2, and put on something decent. I saw what you brought with you." Of course, she hadn't seen my suitcase, but she felt it was her duty to comment on my wardrobe anyway. I nodded silently and sat down at the table where my father was already eating breakfast, hidden behind the newspaper. "Good morning, Dad," I said. Lucas put down the newspaper and nodded. "Bethany, did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." The conversation, as usual, was awkward. We had never been good at communicating, about anything important or trivial. There had always been a wall between us. Now I understood why. Abbott was the last to come down to breakfast, looking radiant and rested. Felicity followed, looking flawless even at 8 in the morning. "Good morning, family," he exclaimed. "A wonderful day for a holiday, isn't it?" Mom perked up immediately. "Abbott, dear, did you sleep well? Felicity, coffee? We have so much to do today." And she began to list the guests, the gifts, the menu, her entire perfectly planned program for the day. I ate my toast and watched them. It was strange to think that Abbott wasn't Lucas's son. They always seemed so alike, not just in appearance, but in their mannerisms and gestures. Maybe it was just the result of many years of living together? Or had Mom deliberately chosen someone who looked like Lucas? Thoughts swirled in my head as I helped arrange flowers in the living room. Aunt Ingrid was supposed to arrive at 2, and I hoped to talk to her alone before the main event began. She knew more than she let on, I was sure of it. By noon, the house was completely transformed. There were flowers, candles, and festive ribbons everywhere. A table for gifts had been set up in the living room and was already filling up with boxes from parents and close friends. My gift for Abbott, expensive engraved cufflinks, seemed so insignificant compared to what was hidden in my bag. Aunt Ingrid arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, as punctual as ever. She was so unlike my mother, calm, gentle, with kind eyes and a slight smile. I caught her in the hallway before my mother could lead her into the living room. "Aunt Ingrid, can I talk to you for a minute?" I asked, nodding toward the kitchen. She looked at me intently and nodded. We went into the kitchen, which was surprisingly empty. All the helpers were in the dining room setting the table for the main meal. "You look tense, Bethany," Ingrid said when we were alone. "Is something wrong?" I took a deep breath. I needed to know if she was aware. "Aunt Ingrid, I took a DNA test," I said quietly. "For myself, Abbott, and my father." Her eyes widened, but there was no surprise in them, only concern. "Oh, Bethany. So you knew," I said, not asking a question but stating a fact. She lowered her eyes. "I suspected. Your mother never said anything directly, but there were hints. You and Abbott were born during a difficult period in their marriage." "A difficult period?" I asked. "You mean when she was cheating on Dad?" "Don't judge her too harshly," Ingrid said gently. "Marriage to Lucas was never easy. He was always demanding, controlling. Miriam was unhappy. But she stayed with him, and she made us grow up in that lie." Ingrid sighed. People do strange things out of fear and a sense of duty. What are you going to do with the results?" I didn't have time to answer before my mother walked into the kitchen, her eyes narrowing at the sight of us whispering in the corner. "There you are. Ingrid, the guests are starting to arrive. Bethany, please help with the drinks. And for heaven's sake, smile. It's your brother's day." Ingrid and I exchanged glances, and she squeezed my hand lightly before following her sister into the living room. That silent gesture of support meant more to me than she could have imagined. By 3 o'clock, the house was full of guests. Old family friends, my father's and Abbott's colleagues, several cousins I barely knew. They all hovered around Abbott, congratulating him on his birthday and admiring his latest achievements. I stood in the corner of the living room with a glass of champagne, watching the spectacle. "He's always been the center of attention, hasn't he?" a voice said beside me. It was Felicity, looking perfect in her cream-colored dress. "Abbott likes to be the center of attention," I replied neutrally. "And you prefer the shadows," she said with a slight smile. "An interesting contrast between you two?" I shrugged. "We've always been different." "And yet you're his sister," Felicity remarked. "Family ties and all that. There must be something in common." There was something in her tone that made me wary. Did she know something? Or was she just trying to get me to talk? Felicity always seemed too calculating to me to just chat. "Excuse me," I said, noticing Aunt Ingrid waving at me from across the room. "I need to help with something." I hurried away, feeling her eyes on me. My nerves were on edge, and I was afraid I might give myself away before I was ready. My father gave a solemn speech at dinner, praising Abbott's achievements and his bright future. Every word was steeped in pride. Pride in a man who wasn't even his son. I wondered if he had ever suspected, or had he simply chosen not to know. After dinner, the guests moved back to the living room for cocktails and casual conversation. It was almost time for cake and my moment of truth. I went upstairs to get the box from my bag. My hands were shaking as I took it out. Inside were the printed results of 3 DNA tests and a comparative analysis. In black and white, neither I nor Abbott were the biological children of Lucas Wells. I didn't know who our real fathers were. Maybe we had different fathers. Maybe we had the same father. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that our entire family life had been built on a lie. I went downstairs just in time. Abbott was standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by guests. Mom was carrying in a big cake with candles lit, and everyone started singing "Happy Birthday." Abbott smiled as he accepted congratulations, made a wish, and blew out the candles to applause. And then what I had both feared and expected happened. After the cake for Abbott was cut and served to the guests, my mother signaled to my father, and he left the room to return with another, smaller cake. It had an inscription written in cream: "The biggest disappointment." The guests laughed, thinking it was some kind of family joke. But I knew it wasn't. It was just another way to humiliate me, to show me my place. "And this is a special cake for our Bethany," my mother announced with a smile that didn't hide her malice. "So she doesn't feel left out on her brother's birthday." I stood motionless, feeling the eyes of everyone present on me. Some of the guests looked confused. Others continued to laugh, not understanding what was really going on. "Your brother is a millionaire and you're worthless," my mother said quietly, leaning toward me, but loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. "Maybe this will finally make you think about your life." Usually, at moments like this, I would cringe, blush, and maybe run away in tears. That's what they wanted. But not today. Today, I had a box in my hands and the truth was on my side. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of calm. "Thanks for the cake, Mom. Very eloquent. I have something for you, too." I held out the box I was holding. It was simple, wrapped in silver paper with a small bow. "What is it?" Mom asked suspiciously. "Just a little gift for you and Dad. And for Abbott, of course." Mom took the box, still looking at me suspiciously. Abbott came closer, intrigued by what was happening. "Open it," I said. "I think you'll all find it interesting." My mind flashed back to 3 weeks earlier, when I had received my test results. The envelope had come in the regular mail, unremarkable, but to me it weighed a ton. I couldn't bring myself to open it all day, leaving it on the table in my apartment, until I finally mustered the courage late that night. At first there were technical terms, numbers, graphs, but then came the conclusion, clear even to a layman. The probability that Lucas Wells is the biological father of Bethany Wells is 0.0%. The same goes for Abbott. I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment, staring at those lines. Strangely, I didn't feel shock or grief. Rather, relief. It was as if I had finally found the answer to the question that had tormented me my entire life. Why was I never good enough for them? Why, no matter what I did, was it never enough? Then came the days of thinking about what to do with this information. I could bury it and go on living as before. But every time I imagined another humiliating family dinner, another comparison with Abbott, another disappointed look on my father's face, I knew I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I chose Abbott's birthday deliberately, not to ruin his celebration, but because I knew that on that day the whole family would be together, and it would be impossible to hush up the conversation or put it off. Searching for documents, collecting DNA samples, waiting for the results, it all took months. Every step brought me closer to this moment, and now here I was, standing among the guests, watching my mother slowly unfold the paper. My father moved closer, his face impatient. Abbott stood next to her, his hand on Felicity's shoulder, watching with a slight smile. Aunt Ingrid caught my eye across the room. There was alarm in her eyes, but also understanding. She nodded to me, and in that nod was silent approval. My mother finally removed the wrapping and opened the lid of the box. Inside was a folder with the test results. On top, I had attached a note. The truth about our family. She took the folder and opened it. Her face changed, first to confusion, then shock, then horror. She looked up at me, her eyes asking, "What have you done?" "What's that?" my father asked, trying to peek into the folder. "Miriam?" She didn't answer, just kept staring at me as if she had seen a ghost. "Mom?" Abbott came closer, his smile fading. "What's going on?" Miriam clutched the folder to her chest as if trying to hide its contents. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just a silly joke Bethany made. Let's get back to the celebration." "No," I said firmly. "This isn't a joke, and you all deserve to know the truth." I walked over to her and gently took the folder from her hands. She didn't resist, as if frozen. "Bethany, please," she whispered, but I had already turned to my father and Abbott. "This folder contains the results of DNA tests," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was racing. "Mine, Abbott's, and my father's. The results show that neither Abbott nor I are Lucas's biological children." The room fell silent. My father's face froze, and Abbott's eyes widened in shock. Felicity pressed her hand to her mouth. The guests began to look at each other, not knowing how to react to the scene. "What nonsense is this?" my father finally said, his voice trembling with anger. "Give me that." He snatched the folder from my hands and began looking through the documents. With each page he turned, his face grew paler. "Miriam," his voice was barely audible. "Is this true?" All eyes turned to my mother. She stood with her head bowed, her shoulders slumped. "I can explain," she said quietly. "Oh, God," Abbott exhaled, as if he had been struck. "You really... all this time..." I handed him the folder, which my father threw away as if it were red hot. Abbott began to read, his hands shaking. Felicity peered over his shoulder, her eyes quickly scanning the pages. Suddenly, she took a step back, her face a mask of shock. "This is impossible," she said. "There must be a mistake." "The tests were done twice," I replied. "There's no mistake." The guests began to whisper among themselves, some discreetly headed for the exit, not wanting to witness this family drama. Others, on the contrary, made no secret of their interest, eagerly absorbing every word. "I think we need to discuss this privately," said the father, suddenly realizing that we had an audience. "I'm sorry, friends, but I think we need some time alone as a family." He began politely but insistently to escort the guests to the door. Some resisted, but most were only too happy to leave. Aunt Ingrid lingered, looking at me anxiously. Everything will be all right, she whispered, hugging me goodbye. Call me later. 10 minutes later, only the four of us remained in the house. Me, Abbott, Mom, and Dad. And Felicity, who seemed to have grown attached to Abbott's arm. Let's go to the study, Dad said in a tone that brooked no argument. We followed him into his inner sanctum, the room where he spent most of his time at home working on projects for his construction company. It smelled of leather, expensive whiskey, and the cigars he sometimes smoked. My mother sat down on the edge of the sofa. Abbott and Felicity settled into armchairs, and I remained standing. My father closed the door behind us and turned to face us, his face a mask of controlled rage. Now, he said, looking straight at my mother, you're going to explain to us what this all means. My father's study fell into a deathly silence. Lucas stood leaning against his massive oak desk, his knuckles white. Mom sat on the edge of the couch, clutching a handkerchief. Abbott and Felicity were frozen in their chairs, and I was still standing by the door, unable to bring myself to sit down. This is some kind of mistake, Lucas finally said, breaking the silence. These tests, they're unreliable. Who knows how you conducted them? I handed him the folder with the documents, which he had thrown on the floor in a rage a minute ago. It's a certified laboratory, Dad. The tests were conducted twice with different samples. The probability of error is practically zero. Don't call me Dad, he barked, and I flinched at his tone. If what's written here is true, then I'm not your father. Lucas, please, my mother intervened, her voice trembling. Let's not... Bethany, why did you do this? Why did you have to destroy our family? Destroy? I couldn't believe my ears. Didn't you destroy it years ago when you decided to have children with another man? Other men, Abbott corrected, his voice unexpectedly calm. According to the tests, we have different fathers. He held a copy of the results in his hands, studying them with the same attention he usually gave to his company's financial reports. Felicity looked over his shoulder, her face pale. That's impossible, Lucas said again, but the confidence was gone from his voice. Miriam? Mom lowered her head, her shoulders slumped. For the first time in my life, I saw her like this, broken, stripped of her usual authority. It was so long ago, she whispered. We were so unhappy. You were always at work, Lucas. Weeks, months on the road, and when you came home, it was like you weren't even there. You were consumed by your company, your projects. So my dedication to my work is what drove you into the arms of other men, and then made me raise their children? My father's voice was filled with rage. I didn't know, my mother exclaimed, raising her tear-stained face. I mean, I suspected, but I wasn't sure. With Abbott, you and Aaron were so alike. I figured it was 50-50. And with Bethany... She stopped, glancing at me. With Bethany what? Lucas asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Mom lowered her eyes. We had a difficult time after Abbott was born. We hardly spoke. You were completely absorbed in your new project in Asia. I thought our marriage was over, and then Taylor came along. He was kind and attentive. He listened to me. How touching, Lucas said bitterly. And you decided that having his child was a great idea? I didn't plan it, Mom exclaimed. It just happened. And when I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't... We already had Abbott. We were a family. I thought we could overcome the difficulties and become a real family. Through lies, Abbott said, showing emotion for the first time. 30 years of lies. Felicity put her hand on his shoulder, but he shook it off. His face, usually radiating confidence, now expressed confusion and pain. I always thought I was like you, Father, Lucas, he said, stumbling over the word father. Everyone said I inherited your business acumen, your mind, even your gait. And now it turns out that it's all... What? A coincidence? Self-hypnosis? You're still my son, Lucas said, and there was unexpected tenderness in his voice. Blood isn't everything. But it's enough for you to reject me, I interjected, feeling anger rising within me. All these years you've treated me like a stranger. Maybe on some level you suspected? Lucas turned to me, and I saw a mixture of pain and regret in his eyes. I never suspected, he said quietly. I never even thought Miriam could... But you were always different, Bethany. Quiet, dreamy, not like us. Because I am different, I said, and I've always felt that way. Every time you compared me to Abbott, every time I didn't live up to your expectations, I felt that something was wrong, that I didn't belong in this family. You were right, Felicity said, joining the conversation for the first time. Her cold voice contrasted sharply with the heated emotions in the room. You were never a Wells, and for that matter, neither was Abbott. Felicity! Abbott exclaimed, shocked by her words. What? She shrugged. I'm just stating a fact. This situation changes everything. Do you understand what this means for the company? For our plans? I couldn't believe my ears. Even at a time like this, she was thinking about money and status. All you care about is the Wells name and the opportunities it brings, don't you? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. Isn't that all you care about? She retorted. Haven't you used that name your whole life? Didn't you take advantage of the education Lucas paid for? The connections he gave you? That's enough, Lucas interrupted, his voice tired. Felicity, if you can't speak respectfully, I'll ask you to leave. This is a family matter. I'll be part of this family in 3 months, she argued, but seeing the look on his face, she stopped herself. Fine, I'll wait outside. She left the room, slamming the door behind her. Silence fell again in the study. Mom continued to cry quietly. Abbott sat staring into space, and Lucas stood by the window, looking out at the garden where just a few hours ago the guests had been celebrating the birthday. What now? Abbott finally asked. What does this mean for us? For the company? Nothing changes, Lucas said firmly. You're still my heir. You grew up in this family, you bear my name. Blood isn't that important. What about me? I asked quietly. Does anything change for me? Lucas turned to me and I saw fatigue and something like guilt in his eyes. Bethany, I know I haven't been the perfect father for you. Maybe on some subconscious level I felt that something was wrong, but that's no excuse. You always put Abbott first, I said, feeling tears welling up in my eyes despite my decision to stay strong. Always proud of him, always supported him. And me, you barely noticed me. That's not fair, my mother interjected. We always wanted the best for you, Bethany. We tried to guide you, to help you find your way. Guide, I smiled bitterly. You call that guiding? Constant criticism, humiliation, comparisons to Abbott, and this cake today, the biggest disappointment. That's how you see me. That's who I am to you. It was a stupid joke, my mother said, but her voice sounded unconvincing. We didn't mean to hurt you. Yes, you did, Abbott said unexpectedly. Mom, let's be honest, at least now. You and Dad, Lucas always treated Bethany differently. I saw it, but I never interfered. It was convenient to be the favorite. He turned to me, and there was genuine remorse in his eyes. I'm sorry, Beth. I should have stood up for you. I should have seen how much it hurt you. I didn't know what to say. In all the years of our rivalry and tension, Abbott had never apologized to me. He had never admitted he was wrong. We've all made mistakes, Lucas said with a heavy sigh. But now we have to decide how to move forward, as a family. What family? I asked quietly. A family built on lies? The family we built together, he replied, despite everything. I looked at them. Lucas, who suddenly seemed older than his years, Miriam, broken and lost, Abbott, looking uncertain for the first time in his life. They were my family, the only one I knew. And yet, I need time, I said. I can't just accept this and go on as if nothing happened. Of course, Lucas nodded. We all need time, to process, to get used to the new reality. Are you staying the night? My mother asked, hope in her voice. I shook my head. No, I'll take a taxi to the station. There's still a train to London tonight. I can drive you, Abbott offered. I need to get back to the city too. I think the holiday is over. Lucas nodded, and I saw his shoulders slump as if the weight of everything that had happened was physically pressing down on him. We'll talk later, he said, when things have calmed down a bit. I went up to my room to pack my things. My hands were shaking as I folded my clothes into my suitcase. Nothing had gone as I had planned. I had expected anger, denial, maybe even accusations. But not this quiet brokenness, not Abbott's sudden remorse, not Lucas's weary willingness to accept the truth. When I went downstairs, Abbott was already waiting for me by the car. Felicity was nowhere to be seen. "She took a taxi," Abbott explained, noticing my questioning look. "She said she needed time to think." "About the wedding?" I asked, getting into the passenger seat. Abbott shrugged as he started the engine. "Everything. The future, the company." We drove in silence for the first few minutes. Plymouth rushed by outside the windows, familiar streets, familiar buildings, a city that had never really been my home. "Why did you do this today?" Abbott finally asked. "Why on my birthday?" "Because I knew everyone would be here," I replied honestly, "and because I couldn't take it anymore. That cake was the last straw." Abbott nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. "You know, I've always envied you," he said unexpectedly. "Me?" I couldn't believe my ears. What's there to envy? Your freedom, your ability to follow your own path despite the pressure. I always did what was expected of me. I went to business school because that's what my father wanted. I started a tech company because it was trendy. Even Felicity... He trailed off. "Even Felicity what?" I asked cautiously. Abbott sighed. "She was the perfect choice. Beautiful, smart, from a good family. The ideal wife for a successful businessman. But love is something else." I was silent, not knowing what to say. Never before had Abbott and I spoken so candidly. "Are you going to break up with her?" I finally asked. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "Everything is so confusing. I don't even know who I am anymore. All my life I've been Abbott Wells, son of Lucas Wells, and now—" "You're still the same person," I said. "Blood doesn't determine who you are." "Funny coming from you," he smiled, "after everything you did today." "I didn't do it because of blood," I argued. "I did it because of the lies, because of how they treated me all these years." I just wanted to know the truth. "And now you do," Abbott said. "Does that make it easier?" I thought about it for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe with time. How do you feel?" He paused before answering. "Lost, angry, sad, all of those things at once, but also free, in a strange way. Like now I can decide for myself who I want to be, not just follow in my father's footsteps." We pulled up to the station and Abbott turned off the engine. We sat in silence, not looking at each other. "What now?" he finally asked. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I need time to think, to make sense of it all. Are we still a family?" There was an uncertainty in his voice that I had never heard before. I turned to him. "I don't know, Abbott. But we're still brother and sister, at least half of each other. That means something, doesn't it?" He nodded, and a faint smile appeared on his face. "Yes, it does. Call me when you're ready to talk, and take care of yourself, Beth." "You too," I said as I got out of the car. I watched him drive away and felt a strange mixture of emotions: sadness, relief, anxiety, hope. I didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could build it myself, without the shadow of my parents' expectations and comparisons with my brother. 3 months later, I was sitting in a small cafe in London, waiting for Abbott. We hadn't seen each other since that day, although we had spoken on the phone a few times. They were short, awkward conversations in which we carefully avoided mentioning our parents. I learned from Aunt Ingrid that Lucas and Miriam were now living apart. Not a divorce, just a break, as they called it. Lucas had moved into his own apartment in London, and my mother had stayed in Plymouth. They were trying to work things out, but 30 years of lies are not easy to overcome. Abbott entered the cafe right on time. He looked different, more relaxed, wearing jeans and a simple shirt instead of his usual impeccable suit. I waved at him, and he smiled as he made his way over to my table. "Hi, Beth," he said, sitting down across from me. "You look good." "Thanks," I smiled back. "You too. How are you?" "It's been tough," he replied honestly, "but I'm moving forward. I broke up with Felicity." "Oh, It wasn't a complete surprise, but I was still taken aback. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he shrugged. It was inevitable. After everything that happened, we both realized we were building a relationship on the wrong foundation. She wanted Abbott Wells, the heir to the Lucas Empire, and I'm not sure who I am anymore. "Who are you?" I asked gently. He thought for a moment. "I don't know yet, but I'm working on it. I took some time off from the company and am traveling a bit, trying to figure out what I really want, not what people expect me to want." "That's good," I said sincerely. "I'm happy for you." "And you?" he asked. "How are you coping with everything?" I took a sip of coffee, gathering my thoughts. Day by day, I changed jobs. I'm now an editor at a small independent publishing house. Less money, but more freedom and creativity. And I've started looking for my biological father. Abbott raised his eyebrows. "Really? How's it going?" "Not so far." I shook my head. "My mom doesn't want to talk about him. She says it was just a fling and she's not even sure where he is now. But I'm still looking, not to replace Lucas, just to know." "I understand." Abbott nodded. "I've thought about it too, but I'm not ready yet. Maybe later." We talked for several more hours, longer than ever before. About our hopes, fears, plans for the future. About childhood, about how differently we perceived the same events. About our parents and whether we would ever be able to forgive them. When we said goodbye on the street, Abbott suddenly hugged me, for the first time in many years. "I'm glad I have a sister," he said quietly, "even if we're only half related." "Me too," I replied, and it was true.